The Puma wasn't built to fight. It was built to look. Then someone gave it a 50mm gun, and everything changed. Germany, 1940. The desert campaigns are already burning through men and machines, and the Wehrmacht's planners are staring at a problem. Their wheeled scouts are fast, but too lightly armed to handle what they're finding. The answer they draft is the Puma, officially a heavy reconnaissance car, unofficially the first sign that someone is giving wheeled vehicles far more firepower than anyone agreed they should have. The Puma arrives with a fully enclosed turret and a 50mm gun lifted from the turret originally designed for a canceled tank project. It carries a rear driver's seat, so the crew can reverse out of contact at full speed without turning the vehicle around. A detail that tells you exactly what kind of machine this is. One that enters a fight it's not supposed to be in, and then has a planned escape route. Just 101 were ever built, all produced between December 1943 and June 1944. That number is the Puma's entire biography. The African campaign it was designed for had already ended by the time the first vehicles reached the troops. The manufacturing was slowed by cast armor shortages. The idea outran the industry, and the machine arrived too late for the war it was meant for. But the paradox it introduced didn't disappear. It multiplied. France took the same instinct and made it Doctrine. The Panhard EBR, updated in 1954, went into service carrying the FL-10 oscillating turret and a long 75mm gun, fed by an autoloader, a system borrowed from the AMX-13 tank. Around 279 of this variant were built. The crew sat inside a narrow, fast, loud machine that could outrun almost anything it shouldn't be fighting, and then fight it anyway. The oscillating turret gave the EBR a rapid rate of fire, but the complexity demanded constant maintenance discipline. Every additional kilogram of firepower pressed harder on the suspension, the drivetrain, and the mechanics keeping it running between engagements. This was already the pattern. More gun, more debt, different currency each time. Italy then took the concept and compressed it. The R3 Capraia, built by O.T.O. Malera and shown publicly in 1982, carried a stabilized 20mm automatic cannon on a 4x4 platform weighing under 4 tons. At least 7 different armed prototypes were built. Not one country ever placed a production order. What the R3 proved wasn't failure, it proved a different direction. The class wasn't only growing larger and heavier, it was also learning how to become nearly invisible, fast enough to arrive before the threat was ready, and armed well enough to punish the mistake, small enough to be dismissed, dangerous enough to matter. That imbalance between what a vehicle looks like and what it actually does is exactly where the hatred begins. Italy, 1977. The cold logic of the post-war arms market has produced a problem no one wants to say out loud. The T-54 and the IS-3 made light anti-tank solutions obsolete almost overnight, and nobody has a clean answer that doesn't involve spending tank money. The response from the O.T.O. Malera and IMI partnership is the AUBL/74HVG, a light-wheeled carrier fitted with a 60mm high-velocity gun system designed to give a small platform a flat, precise, almost tank-level punch without the weight of a tank platform. On paper, the argument is elegant. The vehicle looks like a scout. The gun behaves like something the enemy doesn't expect from a scout. That gap between appearance and capability is exactly what makes this class dangerous. The AUBL/74HVG is small, low, fast, and carries a very specific kind of hurt. The problem is that the gun's post-armor effect is weak. The rate of fire is modest. The depression angles are poor, and the market looked at all of it and decided it wasn't enough of any one thing to justify a procurement commitment. Good engineering, wrong moment. South Africa builds the same argument, but bigger and far more convincing. The Ruicot 105 arrives in the 1990s as an export-focused evolution of the baseline platform, already battle-proven by Angola, and the hard lessons of operating wheeled armor across enormous distances in brutal terrain. The upgrade adds a 105mm GT7 gun, modern sights, thermal capability, and NATO-compatible ammunition. The published figures read like a wish list. Around 120 kilometers per hour, close to 1,000 kilometers of range, protection against 23mm rounds across the frontal arc, hunter-killer fire control. It is, on every spec sheet, the near-perfect image of what a wheeled tank destroyer should be. One prototype was built. The South African Army looked at their existing Rooikot and decided it was already enough. No export customer appeared. The machine that seemed ready for a new era never got one. Italy closes the second part not with a prototype, but with a mature argument that refuses to stop. The Centauro enters service in 1992, and by 1993 it's already in Somalia. Bosnia follows, Kosovo, Iraq, Lebanon. The base version carries a 105mm gun, does 110 kilometers per hour on road, and keeps a power-to-weight ratio that makes most wheeled vehicles look slow. The Centauro 120 variant pushes the question further. 120mm gun, modern fire control, a direct challenge to the assumption that heavy caliber belongs only to tracked platforms. Oman eventually buys 9 of this variant. Italy's own army decides the baseline is sufficient. The lesson the second part leaves behind is clean. The gun is winning the argument. The chassis is paying for it in armor, survivability, and the permanent tension between what the crew is capable of doing and what the machine can actually survive if the plan goes wrong. By the time the Elan 90 Mark VII rolls off the Sandock Austral line in 1979, the wheeled armored car is no longer a daring idea. It's a procurement decision. South Africa needed something light, simple to maintain, and capable of operating far from the nearest resupply point. What they built, on a licensed French AML chassis, eventually reached around 1,600 units for domestic use and export. The Mark VII variant shows the fingerprints of long field service, revised commander's cupola, relocated headlights, improved brakes, better transmission, a longer nose section for the driver's workspace. These aren't the changes of an enthusiastic engineer. These are the changes of an army that lived with the machine long enough to know exactly where it hurt. The Elan 90 carries a 90mm gun on a 4x4 chassis that weighs just over 6 tons. In the bush, in the gaps, along dry ridgelines, that combination arrives before heavier vehicles and fires before the enemy adjusts. That's its logic. But by the late 1960s, the South African military was already saying openly that the Elan 90 was not suited to conventional warfare. It couldn't properly cross trenches, it struggled off-road under its own tire pressure. And the gun wasn't effective enough against armor at serious range. Long service revealed every limit the design had tried to hide. The search for a replacement eventually leads directly to the Rooikot. France takes the same class and gives it a longer life and a bigger stage. The AMX-10RC enters service in the late 1970s as the direct successor to the Panhard EBR. The same French school of thought, now grown into a 6-wheeled platform with a 105mm gun, hydro-pneumatic suspension that adjusts the vehicle's ride height and behavior on the move, and an early amphibious capability. A modernization program between 2005 and 2010 brings 256 machines up to the RCR standard, better protection, updated self-defense systems, revised suspension and communications. The AMX-10RC is one of the clearest formulas the class ever produced. Long strategic range, serious firepower, strong optics, a suspension that actively changes how the vehicle sits and moves. It doesn't accidentally end up powerful. It's designed from the start to hit harder than the enemy expects from something running on 6 wheels. The problem has never gone away. When armies begin treating it as a light tank rather than a fire support and reconnaissance platform, the thin aluminum hull becomes someone's fatal assumption. Britain runs the same instinct through a different filter. The Fox enters British Army service in 1975, aluminum hull, amphibious, a 30mm Rarden cannon, a top speed around 65 miles per hour, roughly 325 built, 180 of them for the UK. Fast, sharp, punishing against light armor and exposed positions. It serves until the early 1990s, when it leaves not because a better vehicle replaced it, but because the machine kept defeating itself. Engine overheating, gearbox failures, a high center of gravity that made crews respect their own speed as much as the enemy's firepower. The Fox is the third part's final word. A strong firing idea on a light chassis can lose not to the enemy, but to its own daily service. Trust in the platform matters as much as the gun on top of it. Japan enters the conversation quietly. The Type 87RCV, built by Komatsu on the foundation of the earlier Type 82, enters service in 1987 after prototype trials in the mid-1980s. Production runs until 2013, eventually producing 111 vehicles, a number that stretches across nearly 3 decades because the unit cost stays high and the annual procurement stays small. The vehicle carries a 25mm Oerlikon autocannon built under license, 6 wheels, no amphibious capability, no NBC protection. It is designed precisely for Japan's road infrastructure, its defense posture, and nothing else. What makes the Type 87 dangerous in the logic of this class isn't the caliber, it's the combination. Fast roads, stable platform, automatic gun with high elevation, optics, and a crew trained to occupy a position before the threat is ready for them. In Japan's operational context, that package arrives where it shouldn't, faster than expected, and punishes light armor without announcing itself as a serious threat. The platform's weakness is its specificity. Built for one environment, priced too high for mass deployment, and invisible outside its own doctrine. Germany, in 1986, takes the ambition further and makes no apologies for it. The Radkampfwagen 90 prototype comes from Daimler-Benz, with the explicit goal of combining the mobility of the Luchs reconnaissance vehicle with firepower approaching the Leopard's League. It is a wheeled vehicle that was designed from the first sketch to carry a heavy turret and think in the language of tank combat. The prototype is completed, tested, and then the project closes. Budget pressure, a shifting defense market, and the approaching end of the Cold War remove the urgency. The prototype ends up in the military technical collection in Koblenz. The Radkampfwagen 90 never changes a war. What it changes is the ceiling. After a wheeled vehicle openly requests a heavy turret and tank-level firepower as its baseline specification, not as an upgrade, not as an export variant, that ceiling cannot be lowered again. The concept is now visible to every program that follows it, whether those programs admit the debt or not. China collects that debt and cashes it in series. The ZLT-11 is not a prototype and not an export demonstration. It is a production vehicle assigned to real units, including the 81st Group Army of the PLA, with deliveries confirmed as recently as 2023. Built on the 8-wheeled Type 08 family chassis, it carries a 105mm gun, reaches around 100 kilometers per hour, covers close to 800 kilometers on a single fuel load, and swims. The fire control is modern. The integration into networked brigade-level rapid reaction structure is deliberate. The ZLT-11 is the class arriving at maturity without embarrassment. It doesn't ask permission to carry a heavy gun on wheels. It simply does, at scale, in regular service, as part of a larger system where the wheeled fire platform is an expected element rather than an experiment. The hull is still thinner than any tank crew would accept. The physics of the compromise haven't changed. But the system has decided that the trade is worth making, and it's making it in volume. France, late 1990s. GIAT's engineers have a machine that can cover 500 kilometers in a single day, fire 115 rounds at targets up to 2,500 meters away, from a standstill and on the move, and do it on a wheeled chassis that carries a fully stabilized 105mm gun with modern fire control. The Vextra 105 is not a sketch or a trade show promise. It completes serious trials across multiple terrain types, logs thousands of kilometers, and demonstrates that a wheeled platform can hit with the tempo and precision a modern army actually needs. Then nothing happens. The French army doesn't order it. No foreign customer signs a contract. The Vextra stays a prototype, not because it failed its tests, but because the market wasn't looking for exactly this answer at exactly this moment. That gap between technical success and procurement reality is one of the class's most consistent patterns. The machine learned how to do almost everything asked of it. The army forgot to ask. Germany and South Africa, working from the same instinct but heavier materials, go further. The Class 3 program, developed by Sandock Austral and extended into the Henschel Vertechnik TH800 heavy variant, produces an 8-wheeled platform carrying a 105mm L7 gun at a combat weight around 41 tons. This is no longer a vehicle pretending to occupy a niche between reconnaissance and fire support. This is a wheeled vehicle openly demanding the language of heavy armor, large hull, tank-caliber gun, multi-role ambition across a single chassis. The South African evaluation is direct. After trials, the program selects not the heavy Class 3, but the lighter Class 2B, the platform that eventually becomes the Rooikat. The Army's verdict is simple and final. The heaviest wheeled option looked impressive and delivered too little practical return for its size, cost, and the logistical burden it placed on any unit that had to field and sustain it. The most powerful version of the idea lost to a more disciplined one. The oldest machine in this part makes the sharpest point. The T-18E2 Boarhound reaches its design weight in 1941, long before the Cold War frameworks that shaped everything else in this video. Britain orders 2,500. The 8-wheeled hull is thick. The 57mm gun is serious. The vehicle's mass puts it in the same conversation as contemporary medium tanks. On paper. Off-road, the weight defeats the concept. Only 27 reach North Africa. They guard convoys. They protect bases. They do not fight the war they were designed for. The Boarhound closes the fifth part with the cleanest possible statement. The impulse to build a wheeled vehicle powerful enough to challenge armor is not a Cold War invention. It appears in 1941, fails for the same reasons it will keep failing, and the class keeps returning to the same attempt anyway. Because the idea is too useful to abandon and too compromised to ever fully deliver on its own promise. The WMA 301 doesn't arrive with an apology. Built by Norinco on a 6-wheeled chassis and carrying a 105mm gun, it enters export service in the early 2000s, sold to Morocco, deployed, used. It is not the most sophisticated machine in this video, not the fastest, not the best protected. What it is available, affordable, and capable enough to matter in the environments where its buyers actually fight. Large territories, thin logistics, opponents who are not fielding modern main battle tanks. The WMA 301 survives and spreads not because it wins every argument about firepower and protection, but because it fits the war its customers are actually planning for. That is the final law of the class, and the Retel 90 wrote it in dust and kilometers long before Norinco formalized it in export catalogs. The South African Retel 90 is a 6-wheeled infantry fighting vehicle fitted with a 90mm gun, a machine that was never meant to be a tank destroyer, never pretended to be one, and spent decades doing exactly the work a tank destroyer might have been assigned if one had been available. In Angola, in long-range operations across terrain that broke heavier vehicles, the Retel 90 occupied firing positions early, engaged, and withdrew before the situation demanded the armor it didn't have. It won not by being powerful, but by being present, mobile, and good enough at the right moment. The Retel also shows what long service does to a concept. The vehicle runs from the mid-1970s into the 2000s across multiple conflicts and operators. By the end, it is not a cutting-edge platform. It is a known quantity, reliable enough that crews trust it, simple enough that field mechanics can keep it moving, and lethal enough that opponents can't dismiss it. That combination outlasts almost every more ambitious machine in this video. The oldest vehicle in the final part makes the argument in the starkest terms. The SARC Mark VI, a 6-wheeled South African armored car from the Second World War, carries a 6-pounder anti-tank gun on a chassis that the crews drive, maintain, and fight in with whatever they have. It is improvised in the way that only wartime manufacturing allows. Built under pressure, deployed fast, used hard. It appears in North Africa and Italy, engages armor it was barely designed to defeat, and keeps moving because stopping means dying. There is no fire control system. There is no stabilization. There is crew discipline, position, and the decision to fire first. That is where this entire class began, and that is where it keeps returning. Every machine in this video, the Puma with its escape driver, the AMX-10RC adjusting its own suspension, the ZLT-11 networked into a brigade, carries the same core logic the SARC crew understood from the start. You cannot win this fight with armor. You win it with position, timing, and the first shot. The wheeled armored car was never loved because it was safe. It was tolerated, fielded, and sometimes feared because it was fast enough to be somewhere it shouldn't, armed well enough to punish the surprise, and gone before the answer arrived. That imbalance never resolved. It simply became doctrine.